Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Reports have emerged online that Anthony Joshua is ready to scrap his Wembley date of April 13th to go off and face Jarrell Miller in the United States. Now, I've got a real issue with some of the reporting on this because it seems to be based on very little. There seems to be the suggestion of this, but there is nothing really to back this up. And I think there's more going on here, which I'll go through, because I think this is more about building Jarrell Miller up to the casual market. And I'll go through that in depth, because I think this is really an exercise to build Jarrell Miller up. But we'll get to the report first. So it emerged first on worldboxingnews.net. First to report it, and its headline, Shocker, Joshua ready to scrap Wembley for Miller after begging Wilder. And I wish this website would actually get rid of the stupid pop-up on the side. It'll keep coming up. Anthony Joshua, there it is again. Anthony Joshua is ready to scrap plans to fight at Wembley Stadium in April if Deontay Wilder faces Tyson Fury again. So this is what they're alleging. But what is it based on? Because through the story, I'll quickly go to it, there is actually no quotes. There is nothing to actually back up the assertion. And what I want to get you thinking about now before I get to it, what does this actually mean if this was actually true? Because if you look at the situation, if he was to go off and fight Jarrell Miller, that would be saying a lot about his current pulling power in the division and not being able to fill a stadium. But we'll get through the quotes first, or not the quotes, we'll get through whoever's interviewed their keyboard. So it continues, Joshua has gone on a charm offensive of late after losing face in the wake of Wilder's amazing draw with Fury on December 1st. The Londoner was even labelled the forgotten man of the division as Wilder basked in the glory of one of the best heavyweight battles in some years. Was Deontay Wilder really basking in that? I mean, it seemed to be he thought he was robbed, that he'd knocked Tyson Fury out. I sort of didn't see it as basking, but certainly it was one of those things where it's taken some shine away from Anthony Joshua. And Joshua has effectively said he's begging for that fight now with Wilder or Fury if the Wilder fight can't be made. The story continues. Since then, Joshua travelled to the United States with his game face on. The Matchroom star may now finally be ready to make his debut on American soil. Jarrell Miller is being lined up for a New York clash in the spring. Madison Square Garden and the Barclays Center are leading the way to host. Big Baby was ringside, blah, blah, blah. Madison Square Garden, Canelo, Rocky fielding. Should he fail in a bid to force Wilder to agree to an undisputed battle, Miller will overtake the winner of the Dillian Whyte vs. Derek Chisora in the pecking order. See, this is asserted, but who is saying this? And on Deontay Wilder, Anthony Joshua said, there's no ducking, I'm willing to fight. That's what he told IFL TV. Begging, yeah, I'm begging. I want to become the undisputed champion of the world. I'm hungry for it, so yeah, I'm begging. In my head, it is Wilder. In terms of figures, it is a much more lucrative than what he was fighting Fury for. Wilder should really consider this offer. I'm not chasing Wilder. It is not that I'm desperate, but I'm just saying that both our schedules are free. He hasn't got a mandatory. I haven't either. It doesn't really go on to say much more. First question I would ask, what is the basis of the story? We've just been through the key bits of it. There's an assertion that Jarrell Miller will overtake Dillian Whyte and Derek Chisora, the winner of that fight, and that Joshua is willing to scrap his Wembley fight to go face Miller at Madison Square Garden or potentially the Barclays in April. What is the basis for the story? You have to ask yourself that, because there is no attribution, there is no quotes, there is no nothing. Honestly, that someone just could have written this and made it up. So you have to ask yourself, what is the point of the story? But also, where did it come from? Has this been fed to the outlet by someone at Matchroom? Because I wondered that. And simply because Jarrell Miller, they're trying to build his profile. Jarrell Miller was at Madison Square Garden with Anthony Joshua. He said before that event with Canelo and the Rocky Fielding fight, he would try to get up in Joshua's face again, try to cause a confrontation. That didn't happen on the night. They were certainly kept well clear of each other. But Joshua spoke of potentially fighting Miller and all that sort of stuff. And Miller has certainly been saying, I'm going to be punching Joshua in the face at some point. And I'll get to a story on that soon. But it got me wondering, is this just an exercise to build Jarrell Miller's profile because he was at that fight. He's going to be at Fight Week activities for Derek Chisora and Dillian Whyte. They've been talking about doing a public relations exercise of sorts in the United Kingdom to try build up his profile. Because remember, you and I, as guys who are hardcore boxing fans, it's probably not so much about us because at the moment, many of us don't believe that Jarrell Miller has done enough for an Anthony Joshua fight. It's as simple as that. The guy's been facing, subpar opponents as he looks to inch forward to a title shot. Bogdan Dinu, Thomas Adamek. I mean, who's really interested in those fights and seeing those fights? No one was. It did nothing for Jarrell Miller publicly. He got a couple of knockouts, but that was expected. He was expected to stop those guys that no one wanted to see him face. A lightly regarded and unheralded prospect in Dinu and a 41-year-old faded Thomas Adamek, who had his best years at light heavyweight and cruiserweight. But in terms of, Jarrell Miller in general, I think if I was to hazard a guess, potentially someone has been told at the website that this is, this idea is being floated, that potentially they could look to go to the United States next if a Deontay Wilder fight couldn't be made. And obviously, who would be Johnny on the spot for that fight? Jarrell Miller. So there's a little bit of dot joining here. But also, Jarrell Miller is the guy that stands to gain from all this attention. Connecting his name with Anthony Joshua, there's been stories all over the internet, over YouTube and such. What does that do? That gets Jarrell Miller's name out there as a potential opponent for Anthony Joshua, and crucially, to casual fans. It's not so much about the hardcore, because the hardcore are a bit lukewarm on that fight right now in terms of the pecking order and who's done what to deserve an Anthony Joshua fight. But the other side of the coin as well. If this was legitimately true, if we put some stock into this article from worldboxingnews.net, we would have to actually consider what does that mean for Anthony Joshua in terms of his profile, his drawing power in the United Kingdom right now. Because that is the other side of the equation. Because if this is truly true, effectively what they are saying, if they can't get the Wilder fight, if they have to go to the United States to face Miller, they are effectively saying that they cannot do the event at Wembley, that they can't find someone to fill out that venue. 100,000 people or potentially 90, whatever the capacity they ended up going for. It would show a lack of confidence in the ability of Joshua to pull that level of crowd against just any opponent. And we know some of these guys are not just any opponent, as Wilder and Fury like to say that Joshua's off fighting nobodies. Dillian Whyte firmly inside the top 10. He is many people's favourite to actually fight Joshua in April. But if it was true that he was to go to the US, they're effectively saying, we don't have confidence in filling this venue. We don't want to go for the financial gamble of having an event and it not to do nearly as well in terms of selling out the venue. Or potentially they're saying, well, actually, maybe some of the projections we've done for either the ground, pay-per-view, maybe they're not stacking up as we thought they might. So we have to ask ourselves these questions. Does it mean if this was true, and it's a big if it was true, that Anthony Joshua's drawing power and pulling power is coming in? It's come off its peak. Because effectively that's what the outcome of going to the United States would be. So I wonder, how much truth really is there to the story, which, as I noted, has zero attribution? It's a suggestion that he's ready to scrap Wembley to go face Miller. For what purpose and why, we don't really know. But if it is true, certainly I think there's some concerning questions we'd have to ask ourselves about Anthony Joshua. I mean, maybe he's decided, if this is true, that he's waited too long to go to the United States, that he needs to make the move now to really build his profile beyond the United Kingdom. Perhaps that is part of it. But for me, my read on this is it's more, because I actually think the article is just completely made up. I think it's a fabrication. The website may have been given a tip to, lead them to these conclusions and such. But I think it's more about building Jarrell Miller up. Because the guy's profile, especially with boxing fans, actual boxing fans, he's a guy who many believe could have a lot of ability, could do things in the division. But he's just not doing them right now. They keep talking about him as this active fighter, one of the most active fighters in the world. But he's in fights no one wants to see him in. And for me, this is more a profile building exercise because Miller needs the profile. He can't do it with his in-ring performances right now because he's in fights no one wants. He can't do it with the trash talk because he's been turning people off with some of the trash. Remember the infamous comments about Anthony Joshua's mother? That ended up leading to, his trip to the United Kingdom in July for the Joseph Parker and Dillian Whyte fight. That got cancelled because of his big mouth. I did a video at the time, will Jarrell Miller's mouth, will that hinder his career? And to some degree, in that instance, it did. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next couple of weeks in terms of the profile, what Jarrell Miller is saying, how they're actually treating him. Because the option of a Joshua and Miller fight, it is there, but it's not a next option, I believe. I think it's more likely to be they keep the Wembley date. It's going to be Dillian Whyte or Derek Chisora if a Wilder fight can't be made. And I don't want to say this is a negotiating tactic with Deontay Wilder, because it's a terrible negotiating tactic if someone wants to suggest that. Because effectively they're saying, your drawing power is not as much, you're going to cancel Wembley and go to a smaller venue in the United States to face a guy no one really wanted to see you against. Because the fight everyone wants is the Wilder fight, or a Fury fight, either in the UK or Wilder in the wherever. Those are the couple of fights that people want to see. But in terms of Jarrell Miller, so he's also been saying a few things. AJ is a great champion, doing his thing outside and inside the ring, but sooner or later I'm going to punch him in the face. Anybody that has the belt, that's how I feel. I feel I can beat AJ any day. I know I can beat Deontay. If AJ wants to come to America, this is the place to do it, and I'm the man to punch him in the face. Eddie, who serves as promoter for both Joshua and Miller, added, I do know that Anthony Joshua against Jarrell Miller at Madison Square Garden would be something very, very special. Jarrell Miller is doing great work. He's going to come over to Britain, I believe, for the Dillian Whyte fight, and he's doing great things. Probably the most active heavyweight out there at the moment. And I tell you, Joshua against Miller is going to be a big fight. You never know, you might see it sooner than you think. Will we see it sooner than we think? I doubt it. I think this is more about building Jarrell Miller up because he needs the help. He really does need the help. They're talking about him fighting in January. But who's it going to be against? It's not going to be against anyone good at, 3 or 4 weeks' notice? They're dreaming. See, this is the thing. Jarrell Miller is sort of clipping the ticket for all these softer fights to get paid. That's what he's doing. He's taking these lower risk opponents because he knows he wants to keep the O, he wants to keep busy, he wants to make some money, because Jarrell Miller is certainly motivated by money. Most of the things he's been saying and doing are motivated by money. But he's not going to take on any more risk than he has to until he gets a big fight. That's a fact. He's proven that out with his actions. I'm going to wrap it up there, but I think this is a complete smokescreen story. I don't think they're going to cancel Wembley. They are going to fight at Wembley, whether that's Wilder, whether that's Whyte. It's going to be one of them, or potentially even Chisora, but I doubt it's going to be Miller. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.